The day finally arrived. It was a Sunday. John had worked hard since making the announcement, and although everyone had supported him and assured him that it would go well, he was a bag of nerves. He was excited and scared at the same time. The choir practices had gone well, and he was sure that everyone would do their best to put on a good concert. A small group of musicians had been hired, and he had secured the services of a local soprano who had decided not to charge her usual fee for the honour of actually singing on the stage of the Royal Opera House, something that had so far eluded her during her singing career. Just after 9 a.m., John, Kurt and Max turned up at the theatre's stage door. Thankfully, they were expected, and as far as the theatre staff were concerned, they had the run of the place. They could do whatever they wanted and go wherever they wanted. There were dressing rooms available for anyone who wanted to use them, and the auditorium had been cleaned, ready for that evening's audience. All that remained was for John and the others to view the stage itself. It was the one thing that John was worried about. As they entered the empty auditorium, John's fears were immediately realized. The full set of the Don Giovanni production was still in place. It took up about a third of the stage and left little space in the middle. John, somehow, had to fit nearly 100 adult singers on the stage, and then there was a smaller children's choir. Where was he going to place them? Then, as well, he had the musicians who would be playing. Where could he place the musicians so that they could do their job? In an almost state of panic, John climbed the short stairs which led up to the stalls onto the stage itself. He looked around in disbelief. The area in the middle of the stage was smaller than he had imagined. It would be impossible to stage his choir this way. "Those stage pieces have to go," announced John in a loud voice. Someone from the side replied, "We can't. They don't move. They're fixed in place." "Oh my God," said John, cursing and walking up to the side pieces which stretched up into the rafters of the stage. He shook one piece and it didn't move. To add to his worries, members of the choir were arriving one by one, and a small group had gathered at the base of the stage and they were looking up at him. They didn't say anything, and they didn't have to. There was not enough room on the stage for the whole choir. People were now arriving all the time. John was asking them to wait in a room at the side of the stage. At the far end of the room was a couple of large doors, which led out into the street. As the three of them, together with other members of the choir, were discussing what to do with the stage, a middle-aged man walked into the room and motioned towards John that he wanted to talk to him. Leaving the group, John walked over to him, muttering under his breath, "What's this all about?" While John talked to the man in fluent French, another man arrived at the outside door. Kurt took it upon himself to go over and talk to the stranger. After a few seconds, he came back to the group. "The Christmas trees have arrived. I need help to get them out of the van," he explained. A small group of them followed him out of the room and into the bright sunshine. A white van with a logo on the side of it was waiting with the rear door standing open. They all walked over to the back of the van and saw that it was filled with green, natural Christmas trees. "How many are there?" Max asked Kurt, looking at tree after tree lying on top of each other. "The man says that there are about 20 trees," replied Kurt. "We need to get them out and store them somewhere." One by one they pulled each tree out of the van and moved them into the room they had just left. Carefully they leaned them against an empty wall and then went back to grab another tree from the van. Slowly, between them, they managed to unload the trees, and finally the man closed the doors and climbed back into his driving seat of the van. After giving them a cheery wave, he drove away, leaving them with the problem of what to do with 20 Christmas trees. If there was not enough space on the stage for the choir, where were they going to place 20 Christmas trees? As they looked at the trees, John came back, half smiling, but at least looking less stressed than he had before. That was the stage manager, he said, breathing a sigh of relief. He's agreed to work today and to help us with the stage. In reality, he's afraid that we'll damage his stage. They have a full production of Don Giovanni tomorrow, and he doesn't want anything to happen. That'll damage the production, so he's going to help us. The group all gave a sigh of relief. Perhaps it wasn't going to be such a disaster after all. He is also going to call the lighting engineer and the sound engineer to help us with the performance, he said, now visibly relaxing. So, what do we do now? Asked Kurt. I'll talk to him and see what he's going to do, John said, now feeling in command again. I want you to show everyone to the changing rooms and make sure that everyone is here. The children will arrive at midday and they need to go to another changing room away from the main choir. With that, John disappeared to talk to the stage manager, while Kurt and Max and the others started marshalling the arriving choir members into a large basement changing room. Soon there was a sense that the concert would go ahead that evening. Perhaps it would not go ahead as planned, but at least everyone was hopeful that something would happen to make the evening pass without any major problems. After all the seats had been sold and the auditorium would be filled with families and friends. They would be expecting something special, even though at this precise moment, no one in the team had any idea what would happen. How was it all going to fit together? There would be a performance, but what it would be like was anyone's guess. By lunchtime, everyone had arrived. The children's choir were already here and being looked after by a couple of their teachers in another room. Someone had thought ahead and brought in a selection of sandwiches and drinks. Everyone was in a good mood and enjoying the day. On stage, John was in a deep discussion with the stage manager. Max walked up to them and looked around the theatre. There was another man sitting in a small glass-fronted room at the back of the auditorium. Up in the rafters, he could also hear someone else moving around. John finished talking to the manager and came over to him. Good news and not so good, said John mysteriously. He is going to help, but he won't change anything from the Don Giovanni production. So it means that he won't change the sound system or the lighting. He is, though, going to move the stage set to one side to give us more room. At least we'll be able to get the choir on stage. He is also going to do something at the front of the stage for the musicians and the children's choir. So, that's good, replied Max, looking hopeful. Yes, I guess so, replied John. It's not that I want, though. I had my own ideas. I don't know what is going to happen. A few hours later, everyone was ready to do their final rehearsals. The musicians had arrived and a temporary stage had been erected at the front of the stage. The choir were arranged on stage. The male members were in the center and the female singers on the right and on the left of the stage. They went through one or two songs while John paced up and down at the center of the stalls, listening to the sound from different positions, trying to make out if he was happy, trying to decide who was being too loud, who was being too soft. He was not happy. He could hardly hear them at the back of the theatre. However, there was nothing he could do about it. It was too late to make changes. Also, the stage had only basic lighting, which made the choir look flat and uninteresting. From what John could see, there was nothing on stage that he wanted to see or wanted to hear. His mood dropped into a sense of disappointment. The choir eventually dispersed back into the dressing room, and John climbed back again onto the stage. "This is going to be a disaster," he said gloomily. At that point, the stage manager came back onto stage and talked to John. Once again, they were talking in fluent French, and Max was struggling to understand what they were talking about. After a few minutes, the manager disappeared, and John came back over to where Max was standing. "The manager wants to bring the Christmas trees onto the stage, so we're going to have to get everyone to help us now." "What is he going to do with them?" asked Max. "I don't know. All he said was that he had an idea," said John, now beginning to panic again. Other members of the choir were summoned, and one by one they brought in the trees from the side room where they'd been left up against the wall. They arranged them in a line against the back of the stage. The manager arrived back again with his hands full of strings of Christmas lights. He indicated that they should wrap one string of lights around each of the trees, as if they were dressing their own Christmas trees at home. Each person took some lights and started wrapping them around the tree, round and round and round. To everyone it was clear that they couldn't remain where they were for the performance. During the rehearsals, they had been barely able to fit together on the stage. There was very little room to spare. If the manager insisted on having the trees next to them, then how would they be able to get on and off the stage? It would be impossible. When they had finished dressing the lights around the trees, they stood back. The manager once again appeared and shouted something to one of his men who was in the rafters above them. Slowly, a series of ropes started dropping down from the roof. There was one rope for each tree, but there were only enough for half of the 20 trees. No one understood this. The people were told to attach the ropes to one of the trees. There was also a power cable, and they had to attach each of the light strings into the power contact. When this was done, and the stage manager was happy with their efforts, the ropes tightened. Slowly, one by one, each of the trees was hoisted into the air. Some were higher than others, but the manager had solved the problem of space. His solution was to hang the trees above the choir. As everyone stood back and looked up, they all agreed it was a solution to a problem, but it just looked to them as it was just a number of trees which were mysteriously hanging in the air above the stage. The manager looked up with satisfaction, smiled to John, and then disappeared once again to the side of the stage. There was nothing more to do. To John, his great operatic production was not going to happen. As far as he could see, it was just his choir singing on an empty stage with a few trees hanging above their heads. It was not what he had dreamed of. It was not what he expected. Now, he was starting to dread the performance. It was too late. In a couple of hours, the audience would be arriving, and the auditorium would be filled with expected friends and families, with ambassadors, with celebrities, with politicians, For John, it was going to be a disaster.